Abend. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Robert.
Yeah, well, thank you. There's enough time for that. Well, Ulrik, constructive journalism, doesn't that sound wonderful? Doesn't that sound like the manifesto of a new movement of modern, positive, constructive journalists? Or like a book title, and you are the one who coined this phrase and you did write the book. And before you will start with your presentation, I just want to have an input in two thoughts which came across my mind. The term constructive journalism is tempting. When Daniela first asked me to have this discussion with you, I found it very attractive because it holds the promise of making a good job serving society and not always concentrating on the flaws and the faults, and instead of that contributing to the solutions and not being considered part of the problem. And by that, perhaps even rising in the public opinion, because journalists are ranking very low in Austria, just about like politicians. So being constructive would be a good way out of this dilemma. On the other hand, I remember whenever somebody in politics or in business asked me to be positive or to be constructive, I learned that I ought to be aware, because it didn't always mean the best. It wasn't meant to be the best for me. A most recent trauma some in the room personally suffered recently was when they talked to Austrian-born billionaire Frank Stronach, who tried to enter into politics. And whenever this guy didn't like a question, he said, well, don't be so negative, be constructive. And that's why I'm a little suspicious about your concept. And we go into detail, but now the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I'm glad I could be allowed to be here, and I'm glad you're here. And also, so I'm not alone with this guy. When I was telling people in Austria that I should be here and meeting you, said, good luck, said, because this guy is very smart. And could I start with what my day has been like? Because
if it's constructive,
it is very constructive. I started by going into the Austrian Airways plane and looking forward to coming to Austria, and I looked in the Austrian airline magazine reading about your beautiful country. And it is really amazing. It's full of snow, the sun is always shining, the girls are so pretty, and the food is fabulous, and the hotels, this is journalism. This is journalism. But I thought, maybe it's not the real correct picture of Austria, even though it's journalism. Then I bought the newspapers in the airport. And after reading them, I'm so glad I have a return flight ticket early in the morning. Because this is a scary shit country. It's terrible. My German is very bad, but this is about corruption, and this is about you don't have any money, you have to either kick out all the refugees or kick the police out. And then there's a big story about in southern Austria where everything is shit. And it's really good. And then there's a very good story about maybe it's a new concept here. It's a sex slave in a garage. It's all over there, and people are dying, and you foreign coverage about the world. It's about people are fighting in Ukraine. They're killing each other in Thailand. Everything is shit in southern Sudan and in Syria. You don't want to mention it, and that was the picture of the world in Austria. I want to go home. This is terrible. So my point is, this is not my concept of journalism. I have been an investigative reporter all the time I've been a reporter, I still think investigative, critical, watchdog journalism is extremely important. But I think that we have come too far out. And I think we need not to change completely, but to start having a dialogue with each other on what the hell are we doing? Or could we change a little? And let me talk for a few minutes, and then you can kill me later. Now I need to start this up. Bling, works. No, not this one. I made this video. Just one evening we said, what's on all the news channels we could find? We just took it and what is the picture of the world on just random night?
Hello everyone. Oh, welcome. Cyclone Haiyan has destroyed hundreds of thousands of homes in eastern India.
The death toll in India now standing at 21 after a powerful cyclone.
Has exploded in Syria, killing at least 39 people.
James Lund was discovered hanging by his shoelaces and a belt in a police station in Ismailia.
A man from northwest London who raped a stranger hours before murdering his ex-girlfriend has been jailed for life.
Violence flares at a game in Sao Paulo.
4 men arrested in London last night, suspected of being involved in a terrorist plot. That's all from us.
Thanks for your company at the International Desk.
Have a good night.
So that's pretty much it. So this is a little talk about raising a question, a polite question, maybe a provocative question about, in the beginning to myself, because I've been a news person for 30-something years, and I love being a reporter. But one of the reasons why I went into journalism is, I guess most of you are a journalist as well, and most of you didn't go into journalism because you wanted to be rich, then you're stupid. Some of you might have gone into television or media because you wanted to be famous, then you're stupid too. Most of us, especially good journalists, they go into this profession because they want to do good. Want to tell important stories for people to make up their own mind so they can make important decisions in their own life. They want to tell stories about the world so we can enlighten people, right? That's what we want to do. We want to do good for society. That's why I wanted to become a journalist. I found out maybe I'm not doing that. I love to do speeches about how important the press is and the power of journalism and blah, blah, all that. And then everybody applauds, but sometimes I'm afraid that I am not what I've done always to the benefit of society. And I really do want to be that because I think that's why people are paying me. This is the only management model I can remember. I hate all these management books and blah, blah, but this is the only thing I can remember if I want to change things. And the first one, it's a very bad translation of a Danish expression, but you understand it. If you want to change something, you have to understand yourself before you can communicate to others that the toilet is on fire. Mm-hmm. You know the expression, toilet is on fire? Now you do. You can feel, if you do not feel the heat on your bum, you just keep sitting there because it's convenient, right? So you have to understand that there's a problem. Otherwise, why change? But if you only tell people there's a problem, people just get depressed. But you also have to come up with an idea, saying a vision, a dream, a new way of doing stuff. So what I want to, and basically strategy, that is coming, that arrow there, that is strategy. Coming from A to B, how do we do that? So a few words about how I think this is a problem. This guy, he is a media analyst in your neighboring country. And he is saying negativity is an illness caught by even serious newspapers, magazines, and not least TV news broadcasters over the world. The problem is not that their numbers are wrong. Problem is that the picture gets wrong. We had a discussion the other night at our newsroom. I had a discussion with our foreign editor and about our Africa correspondent. He had been into southern Sudan telling people about that, what is the terrible thing happening there. Now he has been for a week in Central Africa to cover what is happening there. Good stuff he has done. Terrible story about what's happening there. There's 1 billion persons in Africa. There are 4 million people in Central Africa. If we ask people in the streets of Copenhagen or wherever in Denmark, what is how are things doing in Africa? What would they say? They would probably say people are dying. They are starving. They are dying of AIDS. They are fighting each other, killing each other all the time. Problem is, it's true somewhere. But the general picture is that Africa has a growth rate in some of the East African countries close to China. The middle class is rising. The child mortality is going down. Things are doing better and better in Africa. Do we cover that story? We don't, because we don't have time, because we cover all the conflict stories, which we should do, but we forgot the other thing. Steve Jobs, 2 months before he died, he had a meeting with this guy, Rupert Murdoch, about the financial models for print, actually. But there was one thing in the biography about Steve Jobs. There was this phrase coming in. Steve Jobs saying to Rupert Murdoch, as a representative of the press, especially the tabloid press, he said, the axis today is not between liberal and conservative. The axis is either constructive or destructive. And he was talking about Fox television as an example. He said, Fox has become an incredible destructive force in our society. You can be better. And I think it's worth remembering, because Steve Jobs was not an idiot. Murdoch could be better. We can be better. You talked about trust is gone, and this is the Danish version. We're not better. I had a call from the car sales people's union, and he was very annoyed that he was very close to journalists down there. Nobody trusts us. We have a problem. People are turning their back on traditional news. I'm a member of something called World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on the Future of Media. And we were meeting in Dubai talking about what is the situation in the world, and they said the revolution in IT and communication has probably hit no other sector harder than the news media itself. No other business has found its role so fundamentally challenged, its value and worth called into question, and its organization and business model threatened of extinction. Call that crisis, right? This is our profession. And then we ask the question, how can we save journalism to help it save the world? Inspired by World Economic Forum saying, committed to improve the state of the world. Sometimes we need to listen louder to what people say. My daughter, when she was a teenager, she looked, when I was telling her how she should behave, how she should not dress, when she should be home, how many drinks she could have, all that. She said, Dad, sometimes you should listen louder. And it's a very good expression, listen louder. A lot of people are telling us stuff. One of them being my neighbor's very, very stupid daughter. She was at that time in 8th grade, and we were sitting there at a party at the street where we live, and she knew I was a journalist, and she said, this is terrible. It is really terrible. I have homework for this week. I have to watch the daily television show every night. It is so fucking depressing. Why are you so negative, she said. I said, we're not negative, you little slut. We are journalists. And that's what we do. And we uncover the world, and that's part of becoming a grown-up, to watch the news and read your newspaper and know about stuff. And do you want us to stop covering that terrorists are flying planes into big buildings, and then should we do a positive story about that so you're not getting depressed? Grow up, little. And then she said, well, I look forward to Monday. Then I'll start watching Paradise Hotel again on television. This is the chairman of our parliament. He said, media always try to put mistrust in every question and news angle on a personal level. Now every politician and potential qualified candidates ask themselves, is it worth the trouble? The salary is not that good. It's the greatest threat to democracy. We've done stories about potential leaders in our country, bright people, they don't want to run for office because politics has turned into something terrible. Nobody wants to listen to their vision, their dream, their ideology. They have to bullfight all the time. They don't want to do it. We empty our tablet press, they empty their garbage bin at private home. We do stories about their children. We are bullying them all the time. They don't want to do it. Who wants to run for office? People who might not run for office for the right reasons. But we say, hey, we're not negative. We're just journalists. And here comes the moment of truth. For me, I was sitting at home in a Friday evening. You remember Friday evening? Come home, the red wine is open, the wife is beautiful, the children are combed, there's candy in the jar, and there will be a movie tonight, and God knows what will happen next. And before that, we will just have to watch the news. That's a Friday evening in many Danish homes. So this was, in 2008, the news shows I was now in charge of. And this was the picture of the world we were presenting to the Danes. Welcome to TV-avisen. There are terror threats against Denmark. Shooting incident in Copenhagen. New regional trains not delivered on time. They're from Italy, so what could you imagine? Cervical cancer is a danger to young girls. Strike among bus drivers continues. Woman abducted and abused in a cottage in Sweden, and we have the pictures of the cottage. Crisis in the Social Democratic Party before conference. Old man runs for president in US in crisis. Court case about plane accident with many dead begins. Suppressed North Koreans works out. A giant mechanical spider creates fear in Liverpool. And finally, the weather forecast, the rain continues. Have a nice evening. This was our Friday evening. And the problem was, none of those stories are wrong. The numbers are right, but this is the true picture of Denmark. It's not. But it's journalism. But is it good journalism? Scary shit journalism. The psychologists say, and I've been interviewing a lot of psychologists, what does this impact we do on people? What does that do to our brain? And this guy, he says, news media is now so full of stories on misery, negativity controlled news flow, and therefore also politics and public debate. Apathy or fear is the result. The risk is that people not only deselect media as sources for news, but also that they disengage in the public debate. Is that interesting or what? I think it's very interesting. We have asked people, 75% of all Danes are deadly tired of politicians fighting on television. But still, each time a guy comes up with an idea, we invite his opponent, and then they can yell at each other for, if they start fighting, it's what we call good television. But after 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the news anchor will interrupt and say, well, you won't agree tonight, but the debate will go on. Thank you for coming. Right? 50% think news focus too much on conflicts. 5% ask for more conflict stories. Poor bastards. 83% ask for more stories which inspire to solutions on the challenges facing society and the world. If we ask them, they say, that's what we want. When I started journalism school, my teachers told me the first day in journalism school, a good story is a bad story. The rest is advertising. Have you heard that? What are the real templates of news? It's this. Conflicts. They're entertaining and easily understood, but where do they agree and where's the solution to the problem they're discussing? Crooks. We dream of bringing down presidents. That's one of Watergate, right? Problem is we don't have presidents in Denmark. So we have to go for everyone else. In Marrakesh at a big conference, I was a speaker, but I'm sad to say my speech was not the best one. The best one was made by Christiane Amanpour from CNN. Maybe you know her. She was talking about how important journalism was in the time of social media, that social media does a lot of good stuff, but it's information, and journalism is what we do with information. and we shouldn't be afraid, and we should keep our self-esteem. But then she said, there's a great threat to journalism nowadays. We should be watchdogs. We should keep people accountable, people with power accountable. But there's a tendency that in our profession, a growing cynicism is going. That we tend to face everybody with power, everybody with the notion that he is a crook. We are so critical to everybody that we make the public debate cynical. And we should take care. And she said that, and she's bright, and she's experienced, and she is a journalistic hero in my mind. She wants to do good for society, and she even thinks it's good business to do good journalism. But even Christian Amanpour thinks there's a danger that we're becoming too cynical, because we think we are so afraid of doing stories that are not critical, because then all our colleagues will say, oh, then you are helping this guy. Do you favor him? You are biased. We're so afraid of that. So it's the safe zone to be critical to anybody all the time. Then there's the third template is victims. There's always someone to feel sorry for. Truth is, the interest groups are extremely powerful. And each time a new idea is coming up, the first thing we do is finding the victims. Who will lose on this? And they have a spokesperson, and they are an interest group. But who takes care of society as a whole? Each time a politician say, maybe not all old people, even though if they are billionaires, should have social benefits or pension in Denmark. Each time somebody says that in a public debate, all us journalists, we go out and talk to the interest group for old people. And they will say, oh, this is terrible, and everybody should, and nobody dares doing that because there's so many elderly people. Who takes care of society? The big group. And then drama. The new thing is there's always an accident somewhere, and we have access to hurricanes, picture of suicide bombs all over the world. Instantly, we have it now. And we pile that together and we call that news. If you ask a person in Denmark in the rural districts if they dare going out after 4 o'clock at night, they will say no, because they're so afraid of being shot by gangs, because they watch them on television all the time. But those gangs, they are in Copenhagen, in small parts of Copenhagen, and they're so stupid they can't hit each other. The truth is the murder rate in Denmark is lower than ever. The truth is the amount of people dying in traffic is lower than ever. Not one person has died inside a car in Greater Copenhagen for 4 years. Not one. Do people know that? No, they don't, because we don't cover that. We cover all the accident because we think that's news. People have never been more afraid. And this is a global illness, because that's what we call journalism. In Austria, Denmark, United States, everywhere. In America, you have a saying, if it bleeds, it leads. My point is, it's not true. It's not even good business. People do not want stupid crime stories about nothing for entertaining. We have to think different, and I'm over in a moment. Einstein said, without changing our pattern of thought, we will not be able to solve the problems we created with our current pattern of thought. So we have to do something else. And constructive news is not saying, now we take everything what we did before and throw it away. And now we do only this. That would be crazy. But it's a tool in the toolbox. It's another way of thinking. It's an add-on to what we can do. We need to add to the traditional news criteria. People also need inspiration and best practice stories to show that the world isn't only crazy, to show that it's full of opportunities and hope. Is it some kind of happy news we want to do? Is it some kind of positive North Korean thing? The sky is always blue? No, it's not. It's not uncritical, it's not superficial, naive, irrelevant, sensational, boring, blind to the world's problems. It's not the sweet story before the weather. It's not stories about firefighters bringing down cats from big trees. This is not what we're talking about. It's about solutions, it's about inspiration, it's about call to action, it's about education, perspective, and positivity. In the old days, news was what happened yesterday, and we printed it in the next day. Then for the last 10 years or so, news has been about breaking news, what is happening live now, reporting live. That has been the big thing since the Kuwait War. Constructive news is saying stories about how can things improve, how can things be better in the future. That is also good journalism. And a lot of examples on to do it. Can I show one example and then stop?
Yeah.
This was a story, one of our best investigative, hard-hitting journalists has been doing, I don't know how many stories about pig productions. There are 4 times as many pigs in Denmark than people. That tells you a lot about the country. 4 times more. We produce so much bacon. We produce so many pigs, and it's turned farming into factories, and it causes a lot of disease to these animals, so they had to add antibiotics to the feed, to what they're eating. And the problem with that is people start going to hospitals, and if they get disease, antibiotics do not work, and they can become resistant. So we've done many stories about that. And this guy, he wanted to do another story about that. We said, now we know the problem now. Couldn't you find somewhere, just for fun, we said, find somewhere in the world who has done something about it. And then he started looking. And then he found this story, I think. Well, then I can't show it. Never mind. The story was basically he went to the Netherlands and he found a guy, a farmer, a pig farmer. His daughter had died, almost died, because of this. She became resistant. And he thought he wanted to devote his life to find out a solution for this. And he founded this idea that he sprayed over his stables with good bacteria, probacteria it's called, who invaded and took the space for the bad bacteria. And it turned out in 2 years he had lowered his use of antibiotics by 95%. That idea is now being taken over by most of the Danish pig industry. They had never heard about it until they saw it on television. So it's not because we don't want to uncover the problems, but we want to add on what could be a solution, what is inspirational. We shouldn't decide what the solution is, but we should try to give example. So this was just a quote I thought could be provocative. Nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. I think the time has come for this one, but you might prove me wrong. So, thanks.
I like your pig example very much because, well, I have to try to sort of balance the forces again. After your perfect sales presentation, I have to sum up all my arguments. And I think the example of the pig farming industry is a very good one, because you were conveying the idea that it was just a lack of information, a lack of good ideas why they use all these antibiotics. I think this example shows that it's a conflict of interest, that the pig farmers in Austria, in Denmark, all over the world, they are not using these antibiotics because they don't know, but because they think it might be the cheapest way to have the pigs grow as fast as possible.
Yes.
So they are not dependent on getting this constructive news, but it's in their interest, and some of them will be able to be convinced, but the others, I think it's more likely to change their attitudes if there are rules and laws keeping them from doing that. And so in my view, this example portrays a fundamental conflict of interest, and it would be phony and it would be false to present this story in this naive way of, well, just let's look for a good idea, and finally we found this good idea in Holland, and then the world is saved. I think the picture you were painting is too idealistic. So let me try to split up your concept in its three parts I see in it. The simplest part is easy to agree upon, while of course it's important to have to give the complete picture of Africa, for example. Yeah, you're right. It's also an important fact that there's a middle class growing in Africa. That it's not everybody starving there. All right. Yeah, and perhaps we should devote a little more time on that. I think that's the easiest part to agree upon. The second part was addressed by this pig farming example. It depends on whether conflict is part of reality or is a way of presenting reality. And I could agree, but I have to balance this strong presentation. I could agree in some detail, and I've written down some examples from our recent experience. But altogether, I think it's a simple truth that politics is a story of conflict, and that history is you needn't say that history is just a history of class struggle, but politics surely is a story of competing ideas, of conflict of interest, of conflict of people who are trying to attract the voters. So I couldn't imagine to present this fact in an idealistic way of all the nice people, they're all working together for the benefit of Denmark. I think that would exclude an important part of reality. Yeah. Third point, and this is the one which did irritate me most, was your quote from the president of the Danish Parliament, saying, well, if the journalists are as bad as they are, if the journalists are as critical as they are, nobody will be ready to go into politics. Yeah, that would mean to pull the teeth from the watchdog, just in order to have a little pet everybody's liking to play with, and this is I think the most dangerous and difficult point in your concept, and that's why I'm still not convinced.
You don't have to be convinced, but I say you use a way of debating which we as journalists are very good at. The Americans call it the tyranny of the or, meaning either you are critical, watchdog, or you are positive, naive, constructive. Well, I mean, my point would be, I'm criticizing myself and us, our profession, by seeing the world not with both eyes, but mainly with one eye. And my argument is not that we should close the other eye and see the world only with this eye. I think journalism is about getting the full picture. I think that we're doing a bad job with that. I think we can do, I mean, this night we have a big documentary on Danish pig farms, on the big, I mean, all the problems, what is happening, how we're producing all this meat. Very critical. And the farming industry hates us for it. But couldn't we do that and also do stories about a real dilemma which farmers, the industry, the politicians, the vegetarians, all these people, they can't figure out, they couldn't find out how can that be solved? Is there a way of doing this so we don't risk a lot of people's lives because they go to hospitals or cannot be treated because they use too much penicillin in their meat? My point is, news, the concept of news, what is that? News is something out of the ordinary. That is basically news.
Yeah, you wouldn't like the evening news being that all planes, including the one which brought Ulrik Haagerup to Vienna, landed on time.
You don't mean that, right?
Yeah.
You don't mean that.
Yeah.
And you don't think I mean that. Because
I don't think you mean that. Yeah.
And of course I don't mean that. So, but an example, if we have done 60 stories, which we had in 2 years, about bus companies in Denmark, around the country, having financial problems, and because they had that, they raised the prices because nobody took the bus, so they raised the prices and thought that would help. And they cut the service. They were not driving at night or not on Sunday, and hope more people would take the bus then, and it wouldn't help. So we could do more stories about bus companies losing money and lower service. Then a guy said, after the discussion, couldn't we think differently? What is news? News is something out of the ordinary. Out of the ordinary in that context would be, is there one damn company, bus company in the country that drives with happy passengers, makes money, and runs on time? And he looked for it, and he found it, and did a story with no conflict, no drama, no victim, no crooks, but a bus company who had figured out it would be a good idea to clean the bus, to make the bus drivers understand they were in the service business. They learned how to smile, that it was important they rent on time. They didn't raise the prices. The bus driver had coffee in the morning, and there was free internet, and people started taking the bus. So the debate around the country next day would be, it can be done. Why the hell don't you do it? That was an idea. So we shouldn't say that was the idea, but it's just, journalism can also be inspirational.
I'm very much in favor of best practice stories and
Yes.
and giving people examples of how people can organize their lives in a better way and all that. Just to set the tone right, I'm aware of the problem that sometimes it would feel eerie and weird if a news magazine like the report I'm responsible for would come with a story saying, well, this politician X or Y, well, he did it just right. Yeah, it would feel strange if it
Of course we couldn't do that.
Well, why not?
Because that will be judgmental.
One could even think of doing it, and we are running stories about the good guys, but the good guys mainly are citizens or citizens' action groups, or perhaps a small town mayor who might be in conflict with his party or other authorities in the country. Sometimes we presenting people as positive examples of how they solve the problem and how they are acting.
But can I ask you a question? I mean, in our interviewers, when they have politicians in the studio, there's a tendency that the ambition is not to figure out what the hell does this guy mean. The ambition is to challenge him, to go after the hole in the cheese, to find the hair in the soup, but trying to do that, we sometimes forget to find out or report on the cheese or on the soup. And I think that's I'm asking, could we find a way, are we doing a good job if, say in politics for instance, are we doing a good job in trying to help people to understand this guy, right wing or left wing or whatever, what is it they want? What is the vision? Do they have an idea? How could that be done? Or are we just trying to be critical in order to show that we are not a PR agent for that guy?
Because we are dealing with people who are trained for hours or days, at least they should be trained, or most of them they are, just in order to present their cheeses without being interrupted and irritated by our questions. So that's the attitude is some rather a defensive attitude that we are aware that those people come and well they are trained to present their good ideas and we try to
make sure that that's
shed
not
the light
possible
on the other sides as well. Before we start around in the audience, I'd like you to ask to reply to my main argument, saying you're advocating a different attitude of journalists in order to encourage people to go into politics. This is the point which did irritate me most, because I sum it up in saying, well, you're dreaming of the teethless watchdog.
No. And I understand if you think that's what I want to do, I understand it. because that could also be, I would agree, if that was my point, it would be very dangerous. But it's not my point. I think we should be critical and I think we should ask questions on behalf of people. But we should also find ways of giving time for people to explain themselves in order for a better public debate so people can understand better. And sometimes it's a bullfight. And I'm not saying that the politicians and their spin doctors and all that, they are very much, I mean, they could stop doing all that bullshit. Because they do that, we feel we have to bullfight them back. But it's much easier changing your own attitude. My point is the tabloidization of news, which has gone into television. I'm not talking about Austria because I don't know, but in our country, and especially in the United States, the tabloidization of news, especially TV news, is really bad. I went to several television stations in California, and they have 4 beats. The reporters are grouped in weather, traffic, crime, and what they say is politics is scandals. So they cover politics, trying to figure out who are sleeping with whom, who said what, which was contradictory to that. But that's how they cover politics. And what is that public debate coming out of that? That's not good. That is tabloid journalism. And I think that is what keeping a lot of bright people away from politics. And I'm not saying that we have the responsibility of getting them back. I'm just saying there's several consequences on what we are doing. And I'm not that naive that I think we can change politicians, but I think we can change ourselves. One example, and then I shut up. We've done a lot of stories about the centralization of jobs and hospitals and police stations around the country, jobs moving away from the rural areas into the big cities. You might have the same discussion here. We did a lot of stories about that. If there was one village going down, we found another village 7 kilometers, same size, they were growing. What did they do differently? All that stuff, best practice. Then we ended up inviting 6 politicians, 3 people from unions and from big companies, and put them together in a room for 24 hours. And we broadcast live on the internet. We had radio once every hour to see how did they do. They should come up, they should figure out, is it a problem? Because it's a political decision whether or not it should be like that. Is it a problem or isn't it a problem? If it's a problem, could you come up with 10 points, a plan that you can agree on that should be done about that? So we had our best news anchor, someone like you, sitting there and have her change her role. Her job was not making them yell at each other, finding the spot where they disagreed, but having them listen louder. Now you shut up and listen to, can you understand what he's saying? Do you agree on that? All that, helping by changing the role of the press, of journalism there. It ended up that they came up with a plan, a 10-point plan. It was a broad perspective. There was the minister, there was the leader of the position, they were there, and the whole country was watching that. And it ended up, they agreed it was a problem, they agreed that something could be done about it, and one of the things that could be done was could be broadband to everybody in the whole country. That was one of the plans. So now they are trying to implement some of that. We shouldn't come up with a solution, but by changing our role there in that situation, we could play a different role and something good came out of it. Not that we shouldn't be critical and be watchdogs in other times, but there we did something different. And that was good journalism.
That's a nice idea, but my question is that news, or is that news reporting, or is it a different format? We have.
It's a different format of news.
The whole afternoon we have news shows for the positive and the constructive news, but in the evening news I prefer to be presented with the facts. But there might be someone in the audience who would be interested in adding to our debate. Yes, please.
Just a few comments. I like Bob the Builder because, you know, the slogan change change Yes We Can, came
Yes.
from Bob the Builder, not from
Yeah.
Obama.
Yeah, he stole it, Obama, from Bob the Builder.
Never
Yeah.
paid for it, I'm sure. The second thing, I agree with the positive news idea completely, but I must take a bit
Constructive news.
to Mr. Wiesner, because if you would have watched Austrian politics the last 10 years, you just got to this point. And you get to the point that you have enough of it. Everybody in Austria has enough of our politicians, except the politicians. So I understand that you would say positive news.
I'm not saying positive, I'm saying constructive.
You're totally right. But I think in Austrian politics, it's really extremely difficult, because he's completely right. And I worked a bit in this business of coaching politicians to say nothing. And that's what they do. They do it really good. Oh. And so I clearly understand that you get tired of those people saying always the same thing at the same time, going down like, you can't listen to it anymore. And of course, those only bad news are good news. This is a slogan all over the whole business, I'm sure of this. But there's also something, I think, Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, the old Chancellor from Germany, said once. There are 3 U's for journalists. He said they're under pressure, they're underpaid, and he said undereducated. I don't agree with the last one, but at least the 2 first one I got clearly. So what can you bring in? Can you bring the long add-on, which could be the solution, or do you have only the time to say what is the problem? This is my question for the newsmakers. Is there enough time to say what is the solution? Or could be the solution?
I think, do you know who has written the introduction to my English version of the book? Helmut Schmidt. And he's talking, and he was actually fun speaking to, and I was talking about constructive, and he was saying, how old are you? And I say, I'm 50. I am twice your age. That's why I am realistic. It will never happen. But good luck, son. You think there's a need for it, but his publisher of Die Zeit. Can I give the example of Die Zeit? I went to Hamburg I went around to find examples. In Hamburg, there are 2 weekly magazines. One is Die Zeit and one is Der Spiegel. Both very good. Der Spiegel is going down the drain. They're cutting, their circulation going down, they're losing money. It's a journalistic flagship, right? They're doing what we journalists think is right. Watchdog journalism, traditional, hard-hitting, political, critical journalism. It's going down. They did, when I was there, they did 10-page analysis on print media future. And it was, you wanted to kill yourself after. I mean, there was no hope, there was nothing there, everything was going down, everything would close, everything was terrible. The only thing they forgot was to write also about their neighbor, their main competitor. What is happening at Die Zeit? Die Zeit is one of the few print publications in Germany, and probably in Western Europe, that has a rising circulation. They're making, advertising is going up. And if we have time, I have a clip from Giovanni De Lorenzo, who explains why do they think they had to change. They were about closing, so they said, we had to look at ourselves and see what did we do wrong, and we were not meaningful to people. And we want to do stories that engage people and give them ideas that can be used somewhere else. And basically be more constructive. And if you read your newspaper and you want to commit suicide after that every day, it's not meaningful. Not that we should ignore the problems, but they have tried to, I'm not saying that everybody should copy that, and they probably make a lot of mistakes, but they are doing they have a different approach than the Spiegel. The point was that Spiegel completely forgot to look at the good example 500 meters away, because they didn't lose. It is more interesting to see the good examples than all the bad examples.
But in thinking that way, you're ending soon with the most successful newspaper in Germany, which is called Landlust. You know that? They have, it's just about gardening and farming and people raising little animals. So success, economic success isn't the strongest argument in this debate, isn't it?
No, it's good quality and creating meaning for people. And I'm not saying they're doing that, but they're doing something different. And you can't say it's not a quality publication, it is. Another example, in Denmark, there's a regional newspaper. They had adopted this strategy. They're saying, we have to change our role. Everybody thinks we are a very stinking cigar, pinpointing at people in our local community who makes mistakes all the time. And that's what we do. Everybody thinks we are assholes. We have to change, and we are irrelevant for people. So they started changing. We have to, instead of sitting around the stadium and looking down, pinpointing at the mistakes the players are doing, we have to be part of it. We have to help facilitate the debate on how can the standard of living in our society improve. And they have done that. They've done a lot of things. Go home meetings, debates, series of articles. Point is, it's the only newspaper in Denmark with a rising circulation. And it's a damn good paper. It's not a shitty paper. Mm-hmm. It's not about farming. It's about life. It's about politics. It's about prioritizations. It's about problems. But their approach is different. And there are several examples of that. Huffington Post in the United States is now the second biggest news provider in the United States. They found out they had a good news section. They started doing that, and now they will implement it all over the place. They have seen that those stories are the most shared on social media, much more shared than any other category of those stories, because people think it's engaging. So I think, I'm not saying it's the only way. I think if it bleeds, it leads. It's not true. Those media is going down the drain. Other people are trying to experiment, and that's what I want to do. I want to see, couldn't we experiment with new formats? Couldn't we experiment with a new debate format? Not saying that hard talk should stop. I love hard talk. But could we have another program where we approach politics in another way and still make it entertaining and engaging? And how can we do that? And we need to do that more instead of shooting it down each time, because that can't be good journalism, because it's not critical. It's not the way good journalism is doing. It has never won prizes.
Because of the lights, we don't see all the people who want to talk.
I'm just curious about a very fine line that you were describing here, but nevertheless a principle line between two different roles of journalists, we may say. Why am I saying this? I think all of us can easily follow your idea that the coverage of the world should be probably a little more representative. I mean, that's the word I was missing, representative in terms of the world does not only consist of conflicts, doesn't only consist of accidents or wars and everything. There are good things out there that should be mentioned, like the crime rates problem. But I sense, and this is what I wanted to ask you to clarify, a little more clarification about this. What do you really think? I sense that journalists should not only cover the good things out there that you can find there if you want to, but they should come up with the solutions themselves, if you know what I mean. And that's the fine line I'm talking about, because that would change the role of journalists. And there's another German example of a journalistic product that exactly did that, to save itself, to kind of survive. And that's the so-called magazine Focus. Focus started out as a news magazine. It wanted to be a competition to get people, a little more right-wing or so, but news. It didn't survive that way, and it came up with the idea it will be an advisory journal. This is it now. It's a service journal. You know it, don't you? Service for best doctor for kidney diseases in Germany or something like that. See what I mean? That's perfectly okay for me. The only problem I have as a journalism educator is this news journalism still, what this service journalism, people thinking about good solutions themselves and then presenting them instead of only finding them.
I think it's extremely important what you raise here, and it is exactly that fine line that cannot be crossed. The moment journalists start saying what is the good solutions and what are the bad solutions, we're not journalists anymore. We're agitators or politicians, and we should never do that. But my point is just as well as we, for many years, are very good at facilitating bullfights or debates or discussions, having people with different opinions, asking them questions, and have the best arguments. We're very good at that. But we have seen that. There's so much of that. I'm saying if we can facilitate that without saying that we are biased doing that, wouldn't it then be okay to see, now we do a different format, not closing this one, but trying to experiment with this? Could we find a format where we're trying to figure out what does this guy mean? How can we all facilitate? Can you two who normally fight, where can you agree on this? Is there a compromise somewhere? Not that we should find the compromise, but helping them to listen louder, helping them to shut up, listen to the arguments from the other side and see, I mean, did you hear what he said? Is that completely wrong? Can't you see any sense in that? Blah, blah, blah. So we facilitate, but we shouldn't cross the line to become agitators or have any idea of how the world should be better. That's not our job. So I don't think we should ever cross that line, because then we are changing the profession. The kind of journalism you're talking about is, I mean, you also see it, I mean, how to cook your marmalade, how to buy the best flat screen or cheapest, I mean, that is consumer journalism. That can be all fine, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about news journalism. I'm talking about news covering something out of the ordinary. And if there's a conflict somewhere, it's a good story if you can find something out of the ordinary, somebody who solved it or did something with it or had an idea. Right? Was that an answer? Okay.
Who else?
Totally agree on the agitator part, but aren't you sort of being too Catholic on this? Because if a journalist is able to identify something going wrong, which is what news coverage does, then he should also be able to identify if something's not going wrong. So, you know, this point of saying that we should not say this is good means you cannot pick a story just like you could pick the other story.
Agree. And a good question to us: why are we so afraid of being accused of being polite or being not negative or being not critical? Why are we so afraid of that?
That's a really good question. I mean it seriously, because as I said before, I know from my own experience that that it would feel somehow strange if we were presenting the actions of a top-level politician as a good example of how to do things. Would look strange, yeah. And I was perhaps there's somebody in the audience who can explain that. I was thinking why that is, that it feels better to do it about, well, small-town mayors or small-town politicians. Well, they might be the heroes, but the big ones, rather not. Perhaps it's due to the fact that the real founded judgment needs more information than, or a better founded information than just saying, well, can you exclude that you might be wrong, proven wrong next year or whatever? So it's the easiest question.
Yes.
I agree with you on that. I'm just a little scared by the consequences I can imagine from your concept.
But you shouldn't take the. I mean, it's not a concept saying you can use for everything. I mean, that would be terrible. I mean, if you watch our daily news show, I mean, we say we will have one story, at least just one story every evening, where we have that approach, where we have that add-on, just as well as we, for the last 10 years, I said, we have this story, we need to have real people there. We need to find a case story in order to explain that story. And we have been trained to do that. We do that all the time. Now we say, all right, is there a constructive angle to that we can add on? Where's the best practice story? Where have other people done? Is there other questions we can ask? All that. So we try to put that in, but not all our stories like that. And we have days where we have none, and then we have days where we have 4. And it would be crazy to say that every subject should be treated like that. That would be sick.
I'm afraid we're about to agree. Michael.
I have a question. How do you put this into practice at VR? How do people react to your theory in daily business? How do you do that?
In the beginning, everybody thought that I was crazy. Everybody thought, asked questions, if not to me, then to each other. Does this guy want to? Is he political? Is it because he wants to support the system or any specific political party, or is it because he doesn't like watchdog journalism, or is it because he wants to take the teeth out of investigative reporting, or all that story, all that fear? And it has taken, and one of the things they did was, I had this book coming out in Danish, and the first thing they did, they found the most critical, the most mean public debater, and put me and him in a television studio. And then the news anchor gave the word to that guy, and he just smashed me. And he had said first I was right-wing, and then I was a communist, and then I was a North Korean, I don't know. I was destroying journalism, and I wanted to destroy politics, and I was completely way back, and I didn't have a chance to explain what it was about. And that was not the idea. Now it has becoming something that even the most critical reporters say, all right, there's something about that, and it is a conversation in the newsroom, and people are coming up with ideas. And we are giving out prizes to the best critical story. We are giving out prizes to the best constructive story. The story that won last year, I can tell you about that. I love that story. It was a story about a father who had a son with autism, and he realized that the whole system and everybody, the school, everybody treated this son as a victim, or looked at all the things he couldn't do as an autist. And he thought, I have to do something to change that, because when he grows up, he will live in an institution. That will be terrible. So he gave up his job, started a consultancy firm where he only hired people with autism. Because people with autism, what can they do? They are socially handicapped, but they are very good at details. So he hired all these autists and rented them out as consultants to software companies and engineer companies that needed people to concentrate on details. And the story they did about that company was, that company is now represented in 17 countries around the world. And their vision is before 2017, they will have hired 1 million persons with autism in their company. 1 million worldwide. Because they focus on what those people can, instead of what the rest of us does, look at all the things they can't do. And that was no conflict, no victim, no nothing. But it was a damn good inspirational story, and everybody cried when they saw it because it's so damn good. So that won the prize last year. So we give out prizes because the leadership style we try to implement is we praise things we want to have more of, instead of hitting all these things we don't like.
Well, if you do it as an add-on, I find this idea interesting. But you always said, well, even in your presentation in one of the papers I read before, you said, well, the problem is that people are turning their backs on the traditional way news are presented as a story of conflict, of crooks and victims. So that looks much more, that sounds like much more than just an add-on, but as a replacement of traditional journalism. And this is,
but that is because then I don't explain myself very well, because it is not, but it's just to say, when circulation is going down and fewer people are watching traditional news shows at night, and they are, and it's going down rapidly, then we could say this is inevitably, it will happen, we can't do anything about it, it's not our fault, it's because people are stupid, or we can say maybe we need to change. Maybe there's something wrong in what we do. Not that we should completely put it down in the toilet, which is on fire, but maybe we need to change some of it. Maybe we should learn a little. Maybe we could change a little, add on, change the tone, maybe just one story in the newspaper, maybe just one story every night or once a week. I don't buy into the idea of having a section only with positive or constructive stories. I hate that. I think it's stupid. I think it should be an integrated part of seeing the world, because we want to watch the world with both eyes. We want to do good. We want to inspire people. We want to show the world as it is with its problems and inspire to the solutions of it.
You're offering concluding remarks, but I ask once again in the audience whether there's somebody ready and willing to make any remarks. Daniela.
I wonder if you have any examples for us if the concept of constructive news also works with high-level politics, because I think it's completely different if we're talking about the examples you presented so far, and when we're talking about politics. And I'm talking about national politics, because I wonder, I mean, maybe journalism might adopt the concept, but I'm sure that the other side, politics or whoever, won't adopt as fast or as willingly, because I mean, then it might be easy to go to an interview when you know that the journalist is very constructive. I know that's again.
But I mean, that is what?
An example. I just asked if you have an example from politics.
Yeah, but what we do, but that depends on how you define politics, because covering politics is not only politicians arguing or the process in the parliament, which is a lot of the political coverage in our country. For me, politics is also, for instance, in talking about health. People don't want to die in Denmark. So they eat pills. They go to the hospital for everything. They want to be cured for everything. The prices are rising. We have to spend more and more money on people not dying. How do we make prioritization between all the different diseases? Should we just go on, or is there something we say, for that you have, if you can't have a child, you have to pay for the treatment yourself. If you think you have big ears, you want them smaller, fine, but it's not on the taxpayers. All that discussion going on. So we facilitated a debate with all the politicians with health, including the Minister of Health, and experts and doctors and patients and all that, in order to have a debate over health policy. Should we just go on, or is there somewhere, or do we agree in the broad political spectrum that we cannot go on paying for everything? So there's something we have to say no to, and who should make that decision to say no, and what, and having votes and all that stuff. For me, that is politics, and that is real politics. That is what politics is about. It's making tough decisions of prioritization, instead of just a process who do not like that, and the scandals about who argues with whom and yells. So I think I think you can.
So we have one and two questions now.
I'd like to turn the point around that you made, which is sometimes it's more dangerous to beat the drum as we normally do and be critical, because we've got to think
whose interests are we playing into by doing that? And a current example, for example, is the European Commission's climate change proposals that came out this week, where the story in Austria was, well, it's a step back because the renewables target is no longer as ambitious as it used to be. And what we missed was that the emissions target, which is causing climate change, is more ambitious than anybody expected. And by focusing on renewables and not on emissions, you're basically going along with exactly what the Industrievereinigung said, with what basically the manufacturing industry says, and all the big emitters. And so I'm saying it's not always a zero-sum game, that being critical is being objective and is being a watchdog. That also brings about certain interests that we should consider. And sometimes I think being more even-handed, which means also pointing out the positives, is doing a better job at being critical.
I'm not a journalist, and I'm here that my English is not good enough to be compared with your discussions. But I'm really glad that I came here because I'm reading newspapers since about 60 years, and I always was wondering why a journalist going to an opera writes an article the next day and he's not even able to play a flute. You are asking him why he is Catholic on it. I think once in your life you should work on anything you are writing about constructively to construct it. Then you will understand why he is changing from destructive to constructive. Whenever you try that once, you find out how difficult it is, and your critics you are writing about anything on politics, on building, on films, or on theater, they are destructive why you never make it. This is the reason why I'm really glad that I came here, and I would suggest that you should work something once in your life before you write the next article. This could help an enormous amount in comparing what you are writing about and what you really are able to do yourself productively. Thank you.
Well, Ulrik, this gentleman is offering himself as a supporter of your ideas. Are you glad with him?
I'm always glad if it provokes someone or it gives some kind of reaction, if people start thinking about it, because I know this is provocative, and it is provocative mainly for journalists, but I see a lot of other normal people, which is people outside the industry. They say this to each other. They are annoyed with us. They are not pleased with the picture we present to them. And that's what they say each time we, by accident, talk to them. And I think we need to listen to not all of it, because they are not always right, but just to some of it. And that's basically, and I think by changing our own approach, we can change a process. It can be more constructive. Can I give one example of how an attitude can change? When my son, he's now 15, when he started in school, in the first day at school, he came home after 1.5 hours, took his bag off, threw it over in the corner, and said, well. And said, well, what? You have to go to school tomorrow again, you know. Yes, that's fine, but now I can read and write. Said, no, you've been there 1.5 hours, you can't, you have to go tomorrow. That's okay, how he wanted to go. But there was a language that grown-ups didn't understand. What's that? Is that some SMS, or I can do an SMS? No, it was called children's spelling. So what are you talking about? Yeah, they had learned this language, children's spelling. He could do that. I said, show me. I gave him paper. So write something then. And then he took a pen and he said, what's that? It's nothing. Read it. And then he read it. It was a story about two trolls playing soccer, and one of them made a soccer goal in the wrong end. Well, that was crap. I mean, oh. So there was a meeting the next Thursday with the class and the teachers. And I was coming late from work, wearing my tie and my suit. You could see how, and I was listening to these, and they had plans, and then can I ask a question? That children spelling shit thing, what is that? And then explain what it was. They had this idea which they wanted to implement on our children for the next 9 years, which was instead of putting red marks under all the letters that were wrong, which was the way I learned how to read and write, and my daughters learned how to read and write at the same school, they would do something differently with this class. They would try to put blue lines under all the words or the few letters that were right. So, are you crazy? Does that mean if Anders come home and say, and you will ask him, can you spell horse? And he will say P-F-N-P-L-B-S-E. You will say, great, you could hear S-E, that's right. So you have to be crazy. Stop giving them homework and this is crazy. I know I was sitting there with my tie. But they went on doing that. And what did they do? They praised all the things that were right instead of giving people a hammer of all the things that were wrong. What happened in that class? Every kid could read before Christmas. Every teacher loved to be in that class. Why? Because the atmosphere was so great. Because the children wanted to be there. Because they were being praised all the time. Not for something that was crappy, but for something they did right. And they loved it, and they wanted to go to school, and they wanted to read and write, and the teachers thought it was great. And in that combination, they ended up doing a good job. And for the next 5 years, that class was the class in the whole part of that country that read, counted, and they did it in math as well. The best class at all in that part for 5 years. Because they praised all the good stuff instead of criticizing all the bad stuff. That is something an approach that only works on children.
I'm glad you said that, because I would add that we should not apply this method to reporting about politics.
No, but we could apply it in the newsrooms.
Yeah, we could
apply it in the newsrooms.
We could apply it for our debates and how we find the stories.
Exactly.
Perfectly right.
Yes.
Is there anything to be said still? If it's not the case, I have one. Fume has a very constructive idea. They have something to eat and drink in the
That's
Ulrik,
great.
Thank you very much
Thank you
for your inspiring talk.
Thank you.